There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They were the camouflage of a Tuesday night, or the quiet hum of a refrigerator, or the familiar weight of a friend beside you on a sofa. You don't recognize them as watershed events at the time. There is no thunderclap, no orchestral score swelling in the background. There is only the moment itself, and the slow, creeping realization, much later, that the entire landscape of your world tilted on that axis, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. For me, that moment smelled like laundry detergent and day-old pizza, and it was punctuated by the softest question I had ever heard. Ethan's voice was a low murmur, a sound meant only for the few inches of space between us. It was so quiet I wondered if I'd imagined it, a phantom echo of my own relentless, hopeful thoughts. We were on the couch, a geography we had come to know with an intimacy that felt both sacred and profane. His head was on my shoulder, a familiar and yet perpetually astonishing weight. The television was playing some mindless documentary about deep-sea life, the narrator's voice a placid drone that had long ago faded into the background of my own much louder internal monologue. For weeks, our evenings had ended like this, a slow gravitational pull, a silent surrender to proximity that lived in a carefully constructed bubble of plausible deniability. He was tired. He was stressed. He just needed to not be alone. I had a list of justifications, a litany of excuses I would recite to myself in the dark, each one a prayer that this fragile, unspoken thing between us wouldn't shatter. "Leo," he whispered again, and this time there was no doubt. The sound was a physical thing, vibrating through his chest and into my own. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had become a desert, and my heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. I kept my eyes fixed on the screen, where a translucent squid with bioluminescent organs pulsed through an inky abyss. I focused on the creature, on the cold, crushing pressure of its environment, on its silent, solitary grace. I tried to become like it, unfeeling, distant, a creature of the deep dark where emotions were a liability. But I was not a creature of the deep. I was a boy on a couch, and the boy I had loved in silence for 4 years was breathing against my neck. He shifted, the slight movement a tectonic event that sent tremors through my entire nervous system. He lifted his head from my shoulder, and the sudden absence of his warmth was a cold shock. I felt the protest rise in me, a desperate, silent no, but I forced it down, locking it away in the vault where I kept all the things I wanted to say to him. I prepared myself for the end of the evening, for the inevitable, casual night, man, that would signal his retreat to his own room, leaving me alone with the ghost of his presence and the loud thrum of my own longing. It was a ritual of quiet heartbreak I had perfected. But he didn't get up. Instead, he turned, his body angling toward mine on the worn corduroy cushions. The dim, flickering light from the television painted his face in shifting blues and grays. His eyes, usually so bright and clear, were clouded with something I couldn't decipher. It looked like confusion, like exhaustion, like a question he didn't know how to ask. His gaze wasn't on my eyes, but on my mouth, and the air in the room became thick and heavy, each molecule charged with a voltage that made my skin prickle. Then he spoke the words that would become the cornerstone of my memory of that night. "Is this real?" The question hung between us, surreal and profound. Was what real? The squid on the screen? The stale air in our cheap apartment? The fact that we were 22 and felt like we were failing at adulthood? My mind scrambled for a logical, platonic, safe answer. But I knew, with a terrifying certainty that hollowed out my stomach, that he wasn't talking about any of those things. He was talking about the space between us. He was talking about the invisible, high-tensile wire that had been strung taut from my heart to his for years, a wire that was now vibrating with an almost audible frequency. Before I could formulate a response, before I could deflect with a joke or a shrug, he reached out. His hand, so large and capable, the hand of a swimmer, designed to pull through water with powerful, elegant strokes, rose slowly, hesitantly. It was as if he were approaching a timid animal, afraid he might startle it into flight. And then, his fingertips, calloused from the pool and impossibly gentle, touched my cheek. It wasn't a pat or a shove. It was a landing, a discovery. His thumb stroked softly along my jawline, a cartographer charting a new and unknown territory. He was searching for proof, for the texture of reality, and my skin burned at his touch, every nerve ending screaming a confirmation. Yes, yes, this is real. I am real. This is happening. I had met Ethan on the first day of freshman swim practice, a lifetime ago. I was there on a partial scholarship, a distance swimmer who thrived on the solitary rhythm of long sets, the meditative burn of churning out lap after lap. I was quiet, observant, more comfortable behind the lens of my old film camera than in the boisterous center of a conversation. I saw the world in frames, in compositions of light and shadow. Ethan was the opposite. He was a sprinter, all explosive power and dazzling charm, the kind of person who seemed to be lit from within. He laughed easily, drew people into his orbit without effort, and carried himself with a casual confidence that I found both intimidating and deeply magnetic. He was pure, unfiltered sunlight. I was the quiet shade of the darkroom where I spent my free hours coaxing images into existence. Our friendship shouldn't have worked. On paper, we were a study in contrasts. Yet, in the shared purgatory of 5 a.m. practices, in the chlorine-scented camaraderie of the locker room, we found a strange equilibrium. He would tease me for my brooding silence, and I would make dry, observational jokes that would catch him off guard and make him laugh, a loud, genuine bark of a sound that always made my chest feel a little lighter. We became roommates sophomore year, a decision born of convenience that quickly deepened into a foundational pillar of my college life. Our apartment became a haven, a messy, comfortable space that was a respite from the pressures of classes and competition. It was during that first year of living together that I had to finally admit the truth to myself, a truth I had been trying to outswim and outrun for months. It happened on a random Tuesday, much like the one that would later change everything. I was in the living room, editing a series of black and white photos I'd taken of the campus architecture, focusing on the play of late afternoon light on old stone. Ethan came home from a brutal practice, his hair still damp, smelling of chlorine and exhaustion. He didn't say a word, just dropped his gear bag by the door, crossed the room, and collapsed onto the couch, laying his head in my lap without any preamble, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He was asleep in under a minute. And I just sat there, frozen, with the weight of his head on my thighs, the soft puffs of his breath warming the fabric of my jeans. The light from my laptop illuminated the fine, blonde hairs at his temple and the faint scar above his eyebrow from a childhood diving board accident. In that moment, the carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart didn't just crack, they crumbled into dust. It wasn't a choice. It was a chemical reaction, an undeniable physical law. Looking down at him, at his unguarded, peaceful face, I felt a surge of affection so fierce and so profound it almost hurt. It was a feeling so pure and terrifying that I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was in love with my best friend, my straight best friend. From that day forward, my life became an exercise in careful curation, a constant process of editing my own reality. I learned to live in a state of dual consciousness. There was the Leo everyone saw, the quiet teammate, the reliable roommate, the loyal friend. And then there was the secret Leo, the one who lived inside, who cataloged every casual touch, every shared smile, every time Ethan would call my name from another room. This inner self was a scholar of ethnology, an expert in the subtle nuances of his moods, the shifting tones of his voice, the way his eyes would crinkle at the corners when he was genuinely happy. I became a master of compartmentalization. My feelings for him were stored in a locked room in the architecture of my mind, a room I only visited late at night, when the apartment was dark and quiet, and I could safely ache for him without fear of exposure. The friendship was too precious to risk. It was the central support beam of my existence, and I would rather live with the silent longing for the rest of my life than confess my feelings and watch our world collapse. So I learned to translate my love into acceptable, platonic forms. I made him coffee in the mornings when he had an early class. I listened for hours when he vented about a difficult professor or a frustrating practice. I was his steadfast, unwavering support system, the calm harbor to his sometimes stormy seas. I photographed him, of course, not in a creepy, obsessive way, but as part of my work. I had a whole series of candid shots. Ethan studying at the kitchen table, a line of concentration between his brows. Ethan laughing with teammates by the pool, sunlight glinting off the water droplets on his shoulders. Ethan asleep on the couch, his face serene and vulnerable. I told myself it was just practice, just capturing moments. But I knew it was more. It was my way of holding on to him, of possessing a version of him that was mine alone, captured in silver and light. Those photographs were my silent love letters, developed in chemical baths that felt as volatile and transformative as my own emotions. He dated, of course. There was a string of girls, none of them lasting more than a few months, until Sarah. Sarah was different. She was smart, kind, and beautiful, and she understood the demands of his life as an athlete. They were together for almost 2 years, the entirety of our junior and senior years. I learned to be friends with her, too. I learned to smile and ask how she was doing, to sit at dinner with them and pretend the sight of her hand in his didn't feel like a physical blow. I became an expert actor, my performance so convincing that even I sometimes forgot I was playing a part. I told myself I was happy for him, and in a way I was. He was happy, truly happy, and his happiness was a light I couldn't help but be drawn to, even if it wasn't shining for me. But every time I saw them together, a quiet, selfish part of me felt the cold shadow of that locked room in my mind, a reminder of the future I could never have. I was his best friend. It was my designated, permanent role, and I played it to perfection. The shift began 3 months after graduation. We had decided to keep the apartment, a decision that felt both like a blessing and a curse. Our lives were supposed to be starting, but we were clinging to the familiar comfort of our shared space. Ethan was working a grueling entry-level consulting job that had him stressed and exhausted, and his relationship with Sarah, already strained by the transition out of college, was beginning to fray. The calls became less frequent, the weekends together more fraught with tension. I saw the storm gathering on the horizon long before he did. I could read the atmospheric pressure changes in the slump of his shoulders when he came home from work, in the way he'd stare at his phone, waiting for a text that never came. The breakup, when it happened, was not a sudden squall but a slow, grinding demolition. It happened over the phone on a Sunday night. I was in my room, trying to sort through a box of old negatives, when I heard his bedroom door click shut, a sound that was unusual in our normally open-door living situation. I couldn't hear the words, only the low, pained murmur of his voice, the long, terrible silences in between. An hour later, the door opened, and he walked into the living room. He looked hollowed out, as if someone had reached inside him and scooped out everything that held him upright. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unfocused. He didn't look at me. He just walked to the couch and sat down, staring at the blank television screen. I waited, giving him space, the silence in the room stretching thin and tight. Finally, I got up and went to the kitchen, my movements slow and deliberate. I made 2 mugs of tea, the same kind my mom used to make for me when I was sick as a kid, chamomile with a ridiculous amount of honey. I walked back and set one on the coffee table in front of him. I sat on the other end of the couch, leaving a wide, respectful chasm between us. "She ended it," he said, his voice a raw, broken thing. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a new, terrible truth that had just been dropped into the center of his world. "I'm sorry, Ethan," I said, and the words felt so small, so inadequate. He just shook his head, a tiny, jerky movement. He didn't cry. It was worse than crying. He just sat there, completely still, as if the act of breathing was taking all the concentration he had left. We sat like that for hours, in the dark, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of city traffic. I didn't offer advice or platitudes. I just stayed. I became an anchor, a fixed point in the spinning chaos of his universe. I just stayed. Around 2 a.m., his head drooped, his body finally succumbing to emotional exhaustion, and he slumped sideways, his head landing softly on a throw pillow. I watched him sleep for a long time before quietly getting a blanket from the hall closet and draping it over him. I turned off the lights and went to my own room, leaving him to weather the first night of his new, fractured reality alone on the couch. That night was the catalyst. It was the hairline fracture in the dam of our platonic friendship, the first tiny fissure through which a new dynamic began to seep. In the weeks that followed, Ethan was adrift. The confident, sunny person I knew was gone, replaced by a ghost who haunted our apartment. He went to work, he came home, he barely ate. The light in him had gone out. My role as his friend became my singular focus. I made sure there was food in the fridge, I dragged him out for walks, I put on movies he didn't watch. I was trying to patch the hull of his sinking ship, to bail out the water that was flooding his world. And in his grief, he began to lean on me in ways he never had before. It started subtly. He stopped retreating to his room at night. Instead, he would linger in the living room while I worked or read, his presence a silent, heavy thing. He needed proximity. He needed the quiet assurance that he wasn't completely alone in his wreckage. The couch became our new territory. We would sit and watch movies, and bit by bit, the chasm I had so carefully maintained between us began to shrink. One night, he fell asleep, and his head lolled onto my shoulder. My entire body went rigid. It was different from that day in college. This wasn't an accident of exhaustion. This felt like a need. I sat there for 2 hours, my arm going numb, my neck stiff, not daring to move, just breathing in the scent of his shampoo and listening to the slow, even rhythm of his sleep. This became the ritual. Nearly every night, we'd end up on the couch. I'd put on a documentary or some mindless action movie, and eventually, the tension would leave his body, and he would drift off, inevitably ending up resting against me in some way. His head on my shoulder, his leg pressed against mine. One time, he was stretched out with his head in my lap, just like that first time years ago, and I had to fight back tears. The bittersweet ache of it was so intense. I was his human sedative, his physical comfort object, and I was drowning in the beautiful, agonizing hypocrisy of it all. I was giving him the comfort of a lover under the guise of a friend. Each night was a tightrope walk over a canyon of unspoken feelings. I was terrified of making a wrong move, of breathing too deeply, of shifting in a way that might reveal the frantic, desperate hope that was blooming in my chest. I told myself it was just about comfort. He was heartbroken, and I was safe. I was the one person who had never left, the constant in his life. The physical contact was, I reasoned, non-romantic. It was like the way a child seeks out a parent for comfort after a nightmare. It was primal, not personal. I analyzed it from every angle, my photographer's brain trying to find the objective truth in the composition. I tried to see it as a series of shapes and forms, a study in human need, stripping it of its emotional weight. But it was useless. When his hand would rest on my thigh in his sleep, or when his fingers would twitch and brush against my arm, my carefully constructed logic would evaporate, leaving only the raw, undeniable feeling. The hope. The terrible, dangerous hope. The ritual escalated. The couch began to feel insufficient. One night, a month or so into this new routine, I was woken by a sound from the hallway. I looked at my clock. 3:17 a.m. I heard a floorboard creak outside my door. I held my breath. My door was slightly ajar, a habit from years of wanting to hear if he came home late. I saw his silhouette block the faint light from the living room. He just stood there for a full minute. I could feel his indecision, his restlessness, radiating through the door. Then, he went back to his room. This happened for 3 nights in a row. He would come to my door, stand there like a sentinel of loneliness, and then retreat. My room was a sanctuary he couldn't bring himself to enter. The open door became a new symbol in our silent language, a question mark hanging in the dark. On the 4th night, he didn't retreat. I was woken by the soft click of my door opening wider. My heart hammered against my ribs. He stood in the doorway, a tall, dark shape against the ambient city light filtering through my window. Leo. His voice was a thread of sound, frayed at the edges. Yeah. I managed, my own voice thick with sleep. I had a nightmare, he said, and the lie was so thin, so transparent, it was almost an insult. But it was the excuse he needed, the piece of plausible deniability that allowed him to take the next step. Is it okay if I just? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. My mind was screaming. A chorus of warnings, of red alerts, of this is a mistake, but the part of me that had been waiting for this, hoping for this for 4 years, drowned them all out. Yeah, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It's okay. I shifted over, pulling back the covers on the other side of my queen-sized bed. The space felt enormous, a vast, empty continent waiting for him. He moved slowly, hesitantly, into the room and slid into the bed. He lay on his back, ramrod straight, his hands folded on his chest, a caricature of someone trying to take up as little space as possible. The distance between us was only a foot, but it felt like a mile. The air was electric. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I could hear the sound of his breathing, fast and shallow. We lay there in silence for what felt like an eternity, two statues in the dark, both pretending to be asleep. After about 20 minutes, he made a small, frustrated sound. He rolled onto his side, facing away from me. Another 10 minutes passed. Then, slowly, tentatively, he rolled back, this time facing me. In the dim light, I could just make out the shape of his face, the dark slash of his brows, the faint glint of his eyes, which were wide open. He was staring at me. "Sorry," he whispered. "I can't sleep." "It's okay," I whispered back. And then he did something that shattered my composure completely. He reached out and took my hand. He didn't grab it. He just unfolded my fingers from the fist I hadn't realized I'd made and laced his own through them. His hand was warm and strong, and it felt right. It felt like a key sliding into a lock. It felt like coming home. He held my hand on the mattress between us, his thumb stroking gently over my knuckles. It was a simple, profound gesture of connection, an anchor in the storm of his loneliness and my longing. He was holding my hand. My best friend was holding my hand in my bed in the middle of the night. My brain struggled to process the data. It didn't compute. The platonic justification folder in my mind was empty. There was no excuse for this. This wasn't about comfort for a nightmare. This was something else. His breathing began to slow, to deepen. The frantic energy in him finally began to dissipate, soothed by the simple, physical connection. He was falling asleep, and I lay there, wide awake, my heart a symphony of terror and joy, holding his hand in the dark. This became the new ritual. It stopped being about nightmares. The pretense was dropped, unspoken. Some nights, he would just appear at my door, a silent question in his posture, and I would move over. He would slide into bed, find my hand in the dark, and within minutes, he would be asleep. Other nights, it would be me who couldn't sleep, my mind racing with the implications of it all, and I would find him awake in the living room, and we would retreat to my room together, a silent, mutual agreement. We never spoke of it in the morning. The daylight brought back the old rules, the old boundaries. We would make coffee, talk about work, joke about the mess in the kitchen. We were roommates. We were friends. The nights were a separate reality, a dreamlike state that existed in a pocket of time, disconnected from the bright, logical world of day. But the residue remained. The line between us was blurring, the edges of our friendship softening and bleeding into something new and undefined. I felt like I was developing a photograph in a darkroom, watching an image slowly emerge in the chemical bath. It was faint, ghostly, and I didn't know if it would ever become clear or if I would expose it to the light too soon and watch it fade to black forever. I lived in a constant state of heightened awareness, my senses turned up to their highest sensitivity. I was aware of the brush of his arm against mine in the hallway, the way he would look at me for a second too long across the dinner table, the way the air in a room would change when we were in it alone together. It was exquisite torture. It was the most hopeful I had ever felt in my life. This delicate, fragile ecosystem we had built was sustained for weeks, a secret garden blooming in the dark. The hand-holding evolved. Sometimes, he would shift in his sleep and an arm would drape over my chest, or he would press his back against mine. Each new development was a minor earthquake, sending shockwaves through my carefully controlled exterior. I became an insomniac, afraid to sleep, wanting to be awake for every moment of this impossible reality. I would lie there and memorize the feeling of his weight beside me, the sound of his breathing, the warmth of his skin. I was hoarding these moments, storing them up like a lifeline, convinced they were all I would ever have. I was so focused on my own internal chaos, on analyzing every detail, that I failed to see the change happening in him. I saw his need for comfort, his loneliness. I didn't see the confusion giving way to something else. I didn't see the way he had started to watch me, too. Which brings me back to the couch, to the Tuesday night that felt like any other Tuesday night, until it wasn't. The hand-holding in bed had become our normal, but this was different. This was the living room. This was the waking world, not the sanctuary of the dark. We were watching the documentary, and he had fallen asleep on my shoulder as usual. But then he'd woken up. He had shifted, not away, but closer. He was awake. He was looking at me. And the atmosphere in the room had changed, the pressure dropping, the air growing still and heavy like the moment before a storm breaks. His fingertips were still on my face, a point of heat on my skin that seemed to anchor me in the moment, preventing me from floating away on the tide of my own panic. His thumb moved from my jaw to my lower lip, tracing its shape with a feather-light touch that sent a jolt straight to my core. My breath hitched. The sound was loud in the silence. His eyes, fixed on my mouth, flickered up to meet mine. And in them, I saw it. I saw everything. The confusion was still there, a hazy fog, but beneath it was something clearer, something sharper. It was want. It was the same desperate, aching want that had been living in me for years. I was seeing my own reflection in his eyes. "Is this real?" he had asked. He wasn't just asking if the moment was real. He was asking if the feeling was real. The feeling that was arcing between us like a current, so powerful it was almost visible. He was asking me to validate something that was terrifying him, something that his entire worldview had not prepared him for. He was asking me for permission, for confirmation. My voice, when I finally found it, was a stranger's, a low, unsteady thing that trembled in the space between us. "Yes," I breathed. It was the only word I could manage. It was the only word that mattered. It was a confession, a validation, an invitation. It was everything. A universe of emotion passed over his face in a few seconds. Fear, relief, disbelief, and finally, a quiet, fragile resolve. He took a breath, a shaky, uncertain thing, and began to lean in. The movement was agonizingly slow. It was a journey across an infinite distance, the inches between our faces stretching into miles. My mind went completely blank. The constant internal chatter, the analysis, the fear, the hope, it all went silent. There was only his face, getting closer, the blue light of the television highlighting the curve of his cheek, the flutter of his eyelashes. I could feel his breath on my lips, warm and sweet. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I was a photograph, waiting to be exposed. And then his lips touched mine. It was not the kind of kiss I had imagined in my countless daydreams. There was no passionate crush, no sudden explosion of pent-up desire. It was tentative. It was soft. It was unbelievably gentle. It was a question. His lips barely brushed against mine, a hesitant exploration, a test. He was asking if this was okay, if I would pull away, if this was a catastrophic mistake. In response, I let my eyes drift shut and leaned into the pressure, just a fraction of an inch, my own silent answer. "Yes, it's okay. Please." That small movement from me was all it took. He made a sound, a soft sigh of surrender that was swallowed between our mouths, and the kiss deepened. His hand, which had been resting on my cheek, slid around to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me there. My own hands, which had been frozen at my sides, came up to rest on his chest, feeling the frantic, hammering beat of his heart beneath my palms. It was beating just as fast as mine. The kiss was still gentle, still tender, but now it was filled with a sense of discovery, of wonder. It was 4 years of unspoken words, of stolen glances, of silent longing, all compressed into this one impossible moment. It was the taste of salt and relief. It was the feeling of a door, locked for a lifetime, finally clicking open. It was everything. I felt a single, hot tear escape my closed eye and trace a path through the stubble on my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pure, overwhelming catharsis. The image in the darkroom was finally clear. It was real. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He didn't pull away completely. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. His hand was still tangled in my hair, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin behind my ear. We stayed like that, breathing each other's air, our hearts gradually slowing their frantic pace in unison. The silence that fell was different from any silence we had shared before. It wasn't empty or awkward. It was full. It was charged with the weight of what had just happened, a shared secret that was now a shared truth. "Ethan," I whispered, his name a prayer on my lips. "Don't," he murmured, his voice thick. "Don't say anything. Not yet." And I understood. To speak would be to try and define it, to categorize it, to fit it into a box that it was never meant for. And right now, in the safety of the dim light, we didn't need definitions. We just needed the moment itself. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes searching my face, as if trying to memorize it. A small, tremulous smile touched his lips, and I found myself smiling back, a real, unedited smile that reached my eyes for the first time in what felt like forever. He leaned in and kissed me again, and this time it was less of a question and more of a statement. A quiet, certain affirmation. This is real. The bubble of that perfect, fragile night was not meant to last. I should have known that. Reality has a way of asserting itself, of crashing through the delicate walls of a dream with brutal efficiency. I woke up the next morning alone in my bed. The other side was cold, the sheets smooth and undisturbed. For a confused, hopeful moment, I thought maybe we had ended up on the couch, that I had carried the memory of the kiss with me into my own room. But then I saw it. A single indentation on the pillow next to mine, a ghost of his presence. He had been there, and now he was gone. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, began to seep into my bones. I got up and walked into the living room. The apartment was silent, empty. His gym bag was gone. His keys weren't in the bowl by the door. A post-it note was stuck to the coffee maker. 2 words in his messy, hurried script. Had to go. Not, good morning, not, see you later, just. Had to go. It was a retreat. A flight. The words were a wall, a sudden and impassable barrier erected between last night and this morning. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at that yellow square of paper, the cheerful color a mockery of the sinking feeling in my stomach. I had been so stupid. I had let myself believe. I had mistaken a moment of lonely, confused grief for something more. He had been vulnerable, and I had been there, a convenient port in a storm. The kiss hadn't been a revelation for him. It had been a mistake. A line crossed in a moment of weakness that he was now, in the clear, harsh light of day, desperately trying to uncross. The next few days were a special kind of hell. Ethan became a phantom in our shared home. He left for work before I woke up and came home long after I had given up waiting and retreated to my room. He was avoiding me with a surgical precision that was both impressive and devastating. My texts went unanswered for hours, and when he did reply, it was with curt, functional responses. Can't talk, in a meeting, gonna be late, don't wait up. We were back to being roommates, but worse. We were strangers sharing a lease, the air between us thick with unspoken words, with the ghost of a kiss that I was beginning to believe I had hallucinated. The silence was a cancer. It grew in the spaces between us, metastasizing, poisoning the comfortable atmosphere of our home. The couch where it had happened felt like a crime scene. I couldn't even look at it. My own bed felt vast and empty, the memory of his warmth a cruel taunt. The hope that had bloomed so brightly in my chest withered and died, leaving behind a bitter, aching void. The locked room in my mind, the one I had so foolishly opened, was now a gaping wound, raw and exposed. The pain was worse than the years of silent longing, because for one brief, shining moment, I had tasted what it was like to have it all, only to have it snatched away. I tried to rationalize it. He was confused. He was scared. His whole life, he had been the straight, popular athlete. This didn't fit his narrative, his identity. He had just gotten out of a serious relationship with a woman he had loved. Of course he was freaking out. I tried to be patient, to give him space. I told myself he would come around, that he just needed time to process. But with each passing day of his determined avoidance, that belief grew thinner, more transparent. The fear that I had not only misinterpreted everything, but had also irrevocably broken our friendship, began to consume me. The silence was no longer just his. It was mine, too. I was paralyzed by the fear of saying the wrong thing, of pushing him further away. So I said nothing. We orbited each other in a state of miserable, silent truce. After a week of this Cold War, I couldn't take it anymore. The anxiety was a physical thing, a constant, low-grade hum beneath my skin. I felt like I was losing my mind, caught in a limbo of uncertainty. I would rather have the brutal truth, a definitive rejection, than this agonizing silence. I needed to know. I needed to hear it from him, one way or the other. I needed him to either confirm that it was a mistake so I could begin the painful process of moving on, or to talk to me, to let me in, to face this thing together. Anything was better than this ghost life we were living. That night, I didn't go to my room. I waited for him. I sat on the floor in the dark living room, leaning against the armchair, my camera in my lap. Its familiar weight a small comfort. I didn't turn on the lights. I wanted the darkness. It felt more honest. It was the place where we had last been real with each other. I heard his key in the lock just after midnight. The door opened and closed softly. He stood in the entryway for a moment, his shoulders slumped, the picture of exhaustion. He clearly thought I was asleep. He started to walk silently towards his bedroom, a shadow moving through the dark. Ethan. My voice cut through the silence, and he froze, his body going rigid. He didn't turn around. His back was to me, a solid, defensive wall. We need to talk, I said, my voice quiet but firm. There was no room for negotiation in my tone. He let out a long, weary sigh, the sound of a man who had been running and had finally been caught. He slowly turned to face me, his face obscured by the shadows. Leo, I'm really tired. I don't care, I said, and the harshness of it surprised even me. You don't get to do this. You don't get to kiss me like that, and then just disappear. You don't get to pretend it didn't happen. He was silent for a long moment. I could feel him struggling, searching for an escape route, a deflection. It was a mistake, he finally said, the words clipped and low. I was a mess. I wasn't thinking. I'm sorry. Each word was a perfectly aimed dart, and they all hit their mark. A mistake. I wasn't thinking. I'm sorry. It was the exact script I had dreaded, the one I had played over and over in my head. And hearing him reduce that moment to a drunken error, a lapse in judgment, broke something in me. The hurt was so sharp, so sudden, it felt like a physical impact. But beneath the hurt, something else flared to life. Anger. A clean, hot anger at his cowardice. I stood up, my knees cracking in protest. A mistake, I asked, my voice dangerously soft. You're sorry? Don't you dare. Don't you dare try to cheapen it like that. Don't you lie to me. Not about this. I took a step closer, into his space, forcing him to look at me. Look at me, Ethan, I commanded, and tell me it was a mistake. Look me in the eye and tell me you felt nothing. He wouldn't meet my gaze. His eyes were fixed on the floor, on the wall, anywhere but on me. I don't know what I felt, he mumbled, his voice cracking. I was confused. Confused. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. Confused as leaving your bedroom door open every night. Confused as showing up at my door because of a nightmare. Confused as holding my hand to fall asleep for a month. That's confusion. What happened on that couch was not confusion. That was a choice. You made a choice. And you can't handle it. You're a coward. The word hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. His head snapped up, his eyes finally meeting mine, and in the dim light I could see they were shining with unshed tears. The anger in his face was warring with a deep, profound despair. You don't think I know that? He shot back, his voice raw with pain. You think this is easy for me? My whole life I've been one thing. I'm the swimmer. I'm Sarah's boyfriend. I'm the guy who has it all figured out. And then this. You. It doesn't make any sense. I can't be. He trailed off, unable to say the word. He couldn't even name it. You can't be what? I pushed, my anger softening slightly at the sight of his genuine anguish. What are you so afraid of, Ethan? That you might actually feel something for me? That it might actually be real? I threw his own word back at him. You asked me if it was real. I said yes. Nothing has changed since then except your terror. He finally broke. He sank down onto the edge of the couch, the scene of the crime, and buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent, racking sobs. The sight of him, so completely undone, extinguished the last of my anger, leaving only a vast, aching empathy in its place. This wasn't about me, not really. This was about him. It was about the carefully constructed identity he had built for himself, an identity that was now crumbling, and he was terrified of what he would find in the ruins. I sat down on the floor in front of him, giving him space, but staying close. I waited for the storm to pass. After a few minutes, his sobs subsided into shaky breaths. He lifted his head from his hands, his face blotchy and tear-streaked, his eyes red. He looked younger than I had ever seen him, and utterly lost. I'm so scared, Leo, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I feel like I'm losing my mind. And I'm so scared of losing you. You're my best friend. You're everything. And I'm ruining it. I've ruined everything. His confession, so broken and honest, was the key. It was the truth I had needed to hear. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself. And in his running, he was terrified of losing the one constant he had left. My heart, which had felt like a cold, hard stone in my chest, began to thaw. I reached out, my hand hovering for a moment before I gently placed it on his knee. His eyes darted to my hand, then back to my face. "You haven't ruined anything," I said, my voice soft again, all the anger gone. "We're just in a mess. But we're in it together. You don't have to figure this all out right now. You don't have to label it. You don't have to be anything you're not ready to be. You just have to stop running." He stared at me, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and a fragile, dawning hope. "But what if I can't? What if this is just a phase? A reaction to Sarah? What if I hurt you?" "You're already hurting me," I said, the words stark but true. "By shutting me out. That's the only way you can really hurt me, Ethan. By disappearing. Everything else, we can figure that out. Together. If you'll let me." I took a breath, preparing to lay my own heart completely bare. "I've been in love with you for 4 years. For years. A phase isn't going to scare me off. Your confusion doesn't scare me. Your silence is what's killing me." The final confession hung in the air. He knew, of course. On some level, he must have always known. But I had never said it. I had never given the feeling its name. Hearing the words, spoken aloud in the quiet dark, seemed to change the very molecular structure of the room. He just looked at me, his mouth slightly open, as if he was hearing a sound he'd only ever felt as a vibration before. "For years," he whispered, his voice full of wonder. I nodded, a small, sad smile on my face. "Since you fell asleep in my lap sophomore year." A flicker of memory crossed his face, and a slow, crimson blush spread up his neck. He looked away, embarrassed, overwhelmed. He looked down at my hand on his knee, and then, slowly, he covered it with his own. He didn't lace our fingers together. He just rested his hand on top of mine, a gesture of acceptance, of surrender. "I don't know what I'm doing, Leo," he said, his voice barely audible. "I really don't." "I know," I said. "That's okay." "Neither do I." I squeezed his knee gently. "How about we start with this? No more running. No more silence. Just this. Whatever this is." He looked at me for a long time, a silent conversation passing between us. I saw the fear, the uncertainty, but I also saw a flicker of the resolve I had seen just before he kissed me. He was tired of running. He was tired of being scared. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay." It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't a promise of a perfect future. It was just a beginning. A fragile, tentative agreement to stop fighting and just be. In the quiet darkness of our living room, surrounded by the wreckage of his confusion and my long-held hope, we had finally found a piece of solid ground to stand on, together. The days that followed our confrontation were not a magical, sudden transformation into a perfect romance. They were quiet, tentative, and achingly gentle. The loud, agonizing silence was replaced by a softer, more thoughtful one. We were learning a new language, a new way of being with each other. The old blueprint of our friendship was gone, and we were drawing a new one, line by careful line. There were no more grand, dramatic moments. Instead, our new reality was built from 1,000 tiny, intentional acts of closeness. It started with the door. That night, after we finally went to bed, exhausted and emotionally drained, he paused at his bedroom door. He looked at it, then back at me. He gave me a small, tired smile, and then he walked past it, following me into my room. He didn't offer a pretext, and I didn't need one. We got into bed, and in the dark, he found my hand, his grip sure and steady. It wasn't a desperate grasp for an anchor anymore. It felt like a statement. "I am here. I am not running." In the morning, we made coffee together, our bodies brushing against each other in the small kitchen. The casual touch no longer sent a jolt of panic through me. It was just a touch. It was easy. We talked. Not about US, not about the future, but about work, about a funny article I'd read, about his plans for the day. It was normal, but it was a new kind of normal. Underneath the mundane conversation, there was a new current, a low, steady hum of awareness and affection that had never been there before. The tension was gone, replaced by a quiet, settled certainty. The physical affection that had once been confined to the dark to the ambiguous space of sleep and comfort-seeking, slowly began to bleed into the daylight. It would be a hand on the small of my back as I passed behind him. It would be him leaning his head on my shoulder while we read on the couch, fully awake this time. It would be my hand, finding his, as we walked down the street. Each gesture was small, but monumental. Each one was a brick being laid in the foundation of our new life. He was learning to be comfortable with the feeling, and I was learning to trust that it was real, that it wouldn't vanish with the morning light. One Saturday, about 2 weeks later, I was in my makeshift darkroom, the windowless bathroom, developing film. The red safe light cast an eerie, beautiful glow over everything. I was lost in the process, in the gentle rocking of the chemical trays, watching an image of a rain-slicked street slowly emerge on the paper. The door creaked open, letting in a sliver of white light before it was quickly shut again. Ethan stood there, his frame filling the small space, his face painted in the crimson light. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to interrupt." "It's okay," I said, carefully pulling the print with a pair of tongs and moving it to the stop bath. "What's up?" He didn't answer right away. He just watched me, his eyes tracking my movements. The air was thick with the sharp, vinegary smell of the chemicals. "I just wanted to see what you were doing," he said. "I've never actually seen you do this." I smiled. In all our years of living together, he had respected the sanctity of my darkroom, never intruding. His presence here felt significant. "It's the magic part," I said, moving the print to the fixer. "This is where the image becomes permanent." He stepped closer, peering into the tray. "It's amazing," he said, his voice soft with awe, "how it just appears out of nowhere." "It was always there," I explained, my voice equally soft. "Latent. The paper was exposed to the light through the negative. The chemicals just make it visible. They just reveal what's already there." As I said the words, I realized the weight of them. I looked up at him, and he was already looking at me, a look of profound understanding on his face. He knew what I was really talking about. Our feelings for each other hadn't appeared out of nowhere. They had been there all along, a latent image, waiting for the right conditions, the right chemistry, to be revealed. He reached out and gently tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear, his fingers warm against my skin. "Can I kiss you, Leo?" he asked. It was the first time he had asked. The first kiss had been a desperate question. The ones that followed had been silent affirmations. This was different. This was a request. It was clear, direct, and full of respect. It was him, fully present and fully aware, making a choice in the bright, revealing light. Or, in this case, the revealing red. My heart swelled. "Yes," I said. And in the strange, beautiful red glow of the darkroom, surrounded by the smell of creation and permanence, he kissed me. It was a kiss that held no confusion, no fear, no apology. It was a kiss that tasted like a promise. It was the feeling of an image, finally fixed, no longer in danger of fading away. We began to build our own world within the walls of that apartment. A world of quiet mornings and shared dinners, of inside jokes and easy silences. A world where holding hands while watching a movie was not a prelude to anxiety, but a simple expression of love. He started to open up about his fears, his struggle to reconcile this new part of himself with the person he always thought he was. And I listened, offering not solutions, but presence. I learned that love wasn't about fixing someone. It was about creating a safe space for them to be broken, to be confused, to be whole. We began to heal, not just from his breakup or our week of painful silence, but from the years of loneliness we had both felt, even when we were side by side. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, and then there are the moments that follow, the ones where you consciously, carefully, build a new reality out of the pieces of the old one. The watershed event is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the real work. The work of learning to trust, of learning to speak, of learning to love out in the open. It's a slower, quieter process than the dramatic revelation, but it is deeper and stronger. It is the difference between capturing a fleeting image on film and building a home, brick by brick. And for us, in the quiet light of our shared life, we were finally home.